Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Prime Minister Theresa May formally began Britain's divorce from the European Union on Wednesday, declaring there was no turning back. In one of the most significant steps by a British leader since World War II, May notified EU Council President Donald Tusk in a hand-delivered letter that Britain would quit the bloc it joined in 1973. Unlike last year, however, when in a referendum the UK voted to exit the EU, which created panic in the Indian markets, Theresa May triggering Article 50 did not rankle the Indian bosses much. While it is still early days to gauge its real effect, or rather gauge its real effect, Indian companies and sectors such as auto, metals, IT and tours and travel that have a notable exposure to the region are likely to see some impact in the days to come. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what's in store for India now that there's no turning back on Brexit. Joining me on the program today are Meera, Shankar, former diplomat, SK Sarkar, Managing Committee member, ASSOCHAM, Abhijit Das, Head Centre for WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and Priya Ranjan, Senior Journalist. Thank you so much for joining me on The Big Picture today. Ambassador, I'd like to begin with you, of course, and ask you, does India need to be concerned about Brexit?
Well, it does weaken the European Union at one level, and I think it also reflects a kind of anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner sentiment which is sweeping across Europe and America. Much will depend on the terms that are negotiated under Brexit, because this notification by Prime Minister Theresa May just kicks off the process, which is likely to take at least 2 years. So what the terms of the exit are going to be will impact how we see it. But clearly there are companies which are already looking at hedging their bets, because Britain was a financial center, it was a center for manufacturing pharmaceuticals and so on. And easy access to the European market was clearly one of the reasons that enabled London to emerge as such a flourishing center for trade and investment. Now many companies are looking to set up, they're hedging their bets, they're looking to set up establishments, and particularly the financial companies in Frankfurt or Paris, in addition to London, because 2 years down the road, it may not be so easy for them to access the European market. In India, we have quite a number of companies which have invested in the UK, the Tatas being amongst the biggest, both in the steel sector as well as in the automobile sector. So they would obviously keep an eye out for how the final deal is going to impact their investments in the region.
Indeed. Mr. Dash, as far as the markets were concerned, last year we saw them reacting adversely to the referendum on the vote to come out of Europe as far as Britain was concerned. But this time around, when Article 50 was triggered, it didn't seem to have affected the market so much here in India.
You see, you can see there is an irony to the situation, that at a time when India is moving towards the goal of a common market, and in India this has been in making for 17 years, and after you had the European Union integration and the euro at the turn of the century. So and for the Indian common market goal, including GST, for which Europe, the single market, has been a source of inspiration, I would say. When that is happening in India, that is, the common market is actually taking shape, Europe seems to be disintegrating, and Britain is getting out of the European Union. The process has begun. Now, as we know, the exit would take place only after 2 years. Now, so in terms of and the vote to exit happened 9-10 months ago. Now, given that situation, the markets won't be reacting knee jerk to this kind of a development, and as you know, the market move with a combination of factors, and the irony of this situation clearly had something to, you know, this contrasting thing, that you have the domestic integration of the common market in India taking shape. That had clearly a positive impact, though there are fears and apprehensions about the Brexit process taking off. So, there was, you know, multiple factors neutralizing, so not a very clear trend you could see from the market movement. But there is clearly about Britain exiting European Union. There are both opportunities and threats, and
Sure.
there are challenges, I would say, that both seem to be there, and Indian businesses and the policy makers would be conscious of both the challenges and the threats that this process is.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Mr.
is going
Sarkar,
to-
is there a major or a big opportunity for India here? Because all the other countries take it, you know, the US is looking inwards, Britain is looking inwards. So is this a major opportunity for India?
Difficult to answer at this stage, because I think it's the picture right now is pretty sketchy. It's too hazy right now, and there are a lot of things which are happening, and there are a lot of pressures being built up. But I would say one thing, and it's a fairly sweeping statement, in fact, that if the FTA with EU floundered, it was basically Britain which put in a lot of objections to that agreement. And so with Britain out of the way, maybe with Europe we would have a better understanding, and we may be able to get through, especially in automobiles, in your of course liquor also, wine has a great future. So those things are bound to happen, but Britain remains important for us as far as, let's say, IT is concerned, and then Tatas of course have a major presence over there through Jaguar and steel also. But there are issues within Britain itself. You see, like Nicola Sturgeon says that she wants the Section 30 order to be put in place, which means that she wants a second independence referendum. The agreement with Ireland may have some issues, because if it is not compatible with the EU laws, so then it has to go. Or rather, it has to be diluted to that extent. I would not say it will go, but it has to be diluted to that extent. Then there are questions like, what happens to the court procedures which are in front of the Court of Justice of the European Union? Are they going to be implemented, or they are going to be, or they would put a stop to the whole issue? Then, is there a divorce cost? Because Britain actually is committed to pay about 91 billion pound sterling over the next 3 years. Now, would that be stopped? So that's another issue which has to be considered. But I would say I'd be a little optimist here, because I feel that the trade deals will start around August. We don't have to wait for the 2 years, which is the mandatory requirement, of course. But since the trade deals are likely to start in August, and the Brussels meeting is taking place on April 29th, so things could start moving, and the picture could become a little more clearer. And when it does, I think India has everything to gain and nothing to lose, because India is in a very sweet spot right now, and whether it's with the EU or with Britain, I think we'll be doing great business.
So we are safe for the time being, is what you're saying?
Absolutely, we're pretty safe.
Okay, okay. All right. Professor Das, you know, as far as some of the sectors that are going to be impacted the most, can you list out which sectors could those sectors be?
Again, it's not very easy to answer that question. There are many imponderables in this entire equation. The first imponderable, of course, is what will be the trade relations between UK on the one hand and the rest of the European Union on the other after the divorce gets completed. Now, if there is a free flow of goods and services between the two through an FTA, then maybe things might not change too much on the ground for Indian exporters. But if there is a hard Brexit and UK is unable to export to the European Union on the existing terms, then the picture might be fairly different and could be difficult as well as there could be opportunities for Indian exporters. But that again would depend on the trade policy of UK itself. Let me give you one example. Textiles, wearing apparel sector. At the moment, Bangladesh has a significant advantage over us because of the tariff preferences which it receives from the European Union. After Brexit, it's an open question whether UK would continue to grant Bangladesh those tariff concessions. If UK reverses what European Union is doing on the tariff concessions, that could be to our advantage. Certain calculations show that we might be able to enhance our exports of wearing apparel by almost $3 billion to United Kingdom after Brexit, in case India and Bangladesh come to a level playing field. So that could be one area where we might see a significant advantage. One area where there are optimistic expectations that things might improve after Brexit, which is unlikely to happen, is in the area of IT services. Given the fact that one of the grounds for Brexit was concerns around migration, certainly any expectation that Brexit could lead to mobility in Indian IT professionals to UK, that might be too overtly optimistic. So at this juncture, we will really have to wait and see to see how the situation evolves, what are the terms and conditions under which UK will continue its trading regime with rest of the European Union, and also what is the overall orientation of UK's trade policy to rest of the world. That really, these factors would determine what sectors get impacted,
Sure.
where are the opportunities, where are the conflicts, where are the challenges.
Indeed. I guess we'll have to wait and watch and see what really happens in the next coming few months. Mr. Sarkar, I know you want to make a point, but also I have a question for you. You know, talking about the IT industry, the IT industry stands to lose the most, would you think, because of what's happening in the United States as well with the H-1B visa issue, as well as, Trump saying that Trump has been talking about made in America and jobs in America first. So does the Indian IT sector stand to lose with the situation in the United States and the situation developing in the UK now?
Let me first say what is in my head. So I'll come to your question. I'll definitely come to that question. You see, the issue is that there are some indirect pinpricks which might happen because of Britain leaving EU. Supposing EU, obviously, why suppose? There's bound to be a trade agreement between EU and Britain. Now, Britain can't do business with the territory of Gibraltar because it has to go through the Kingdom of Spain. Now, why I took that example, not because Gibraltar is a very important area, but the fact remains is that you have to, there's some kind of a chaos which might take place, and this will take a little time to sort out. And that's just for the information of the viewers, because
Yes.
So these are issues which may come up, which I hope they don't, but they are likely to come up also. Now, coming back to your question of IT, as far as IT is concerned, I have a contrarian view. I think India is doing pretty well. India is very firmly entrenched. The IT industry in India is $160 billion. Directly and indirectly, we employ about 37.5 million people. And we are spreading our wings everywhere. Even in America, I don't think we have a major issue, because it's basically the hit is against the illegal immigrants. It's not against the skilled worker. And to that extent, I think India stands to gain. As far as Britain is concerned, Britain remains, and it will remain, a very important financial center. And when you have such a financial center, cannot function without technology. And if that be the issue, that be the case, then obviously India will play a very major role over there. Because Paris taking over from London is something which, I mean, at least I can't foresee that in the next 15 to 20 years. London will remain important, and so obviously the technology part will always remain important, and India will always play a role. And the most important thing today is the Indian IT industry is growing. And it has in fact it's grown up now in the sense that it is no longer a backroom boy, and it has started getting into areas which are at a much higher level. So I would strongly feel that India has a great chance in IT. Maybe there will be some roadblocks on the way, but over a period of 5 years, I see the Indian IT industry doing very well, both in Europe as well as in Britain.
Sure, fair enough.
Just
Yeah, yes,
answer.
Ambassador.
I think that what has happened in the UK already is that Prime Minister Theresa May has taken a decision to enhance the minimum threshold for eligibility for visas, work visas. So the salary scale has been upped. Similarly, in the US, what has happened so far is that the fast track processing of H-1B visas, where you could actually pay more fees and get the processing done in 15 days or so, has been done away with. So now it's only normal processing, which takes 3 to 6 months. And the second is that the work visas for spouses on H-1B have been done away with. There's legislation pending, draft legislation in the Congress, which would make the grant of H-1B visas far more difficult, and which would also raise the ceiling. One draft legislation proposes $100,000 as the minimum, the other one proposes $130,000 as the minimum. So obviously this would mean that to some extent the cost advantage which our companies have enjoyed will be eroded. They would have to look at different models of operating, different ways of operating.
They have to change with the times.
They will have to change and see this. You can also look upon it as an opportunity to do more work within India of a caliber which will take us, will up the game for India. The other aspect of Indian IT companies in UK would be that right now they can access the European market.
Yes.
Many of them have their headquarters in London, and from there they operate in the entire European market.
UK is like the doorway to Europe for Indian companies.
It's the doorway to Europe. If that is fractured in some way, they would have to look at opening offices in other parts of Europe, which would enable them to access Europe, and perhaps thinning down the UK offices.
Indeed.
It depends how it's going to shape up.
Yeah, it depends on how it's going to shape up, of course. But, another sector that needs to be keenly watched, Professor, is the pharma sector, because it's got a huge presence in Europe and in UK as well. So that sector, do you believe, is going to be impacted as a result of Brexit?
In fact, in the pharma sector, I do see some opportunities arising for us in the UK market, particularly in the National Health Scheme. Given the concerns in UK about rising healthcare costs, we might see a trend towards larger government procurement of generics from India. And if we position ourselves appropriately, we might be able to tap into this growing market. So that is one area where there would be benefits. Linked to that is, of course, affordable healthcare. If we look at the existing rules of the European Union, the insurance companies are able to bear the costs if the flights are within a particular time limit. That excludes patients from coming to India. Maybe these rules might change after Brexit. These rules might change in UK. They might change in European Union as well. And if that does happen, then that would afford immense opportunity for healthcare providers in India. So that's an area where we must position ourselves appropriately. We must be prepared for the opportunities that could arise.
Yeah, prepare and get ready is the general consensus here, and we need to innovate and need to change with the times. But let's move on now, Mr. Dash. As far as the situation in the United States, after Trump winning and also after the Brexit clause was triggered, we saw last year that several of the investors turning to gold. Now, is that a trend that is going to continue, where investors look to invest in gold going forward?
No, I don't see that. Why that should be particularly investors should be turning to gold. I do not see a link anywhere.
Okay, fair enough. Let's talk about some of the sectors now, Mr. Sarkar, as far as where there could be further opportunities. Now, the travel sector as well as the tourism sector is a sector that could possibly work for Indians, because the sterling has been depreciating over the last 1 year. We've seen that the sterling has been doing badly. So it's going to be cheaper for tourists to go to the UK if you look at it that way.
Yes, I mean, before I come to your question, you see what is happening today is that the emerging nations are gaining in importance. Despite Fed Reserve increasing the rate, there's still money which is flowing into the emerging nations, which means that the emerging nations by itself, and of course India should be at the forefront, is going to economically going to move up. And once that happens, obviously the per capita income is going to go up. And when that in turn means that I will have some money to travel. And Europe will obviously be a very, very important place for me to travel, and not to forget Bollywood, because Bollywood also would have a lot of things to do in Europe. So it's a combination of those things, and travel will obviously be a very, very important factor. So even in Scandinavian countries, even I mean, once you get the gateway, so you're going to travel all over Europe, and 27 countries are part of EU. There are others also who are equally important. So the travel to Europe will become fairly important. Britain has always been some kind of a second home for us, in the sense that most of us who have gone abroad have possibly gone to UK as the first country, or at least they have gone there. So if you take all that into account, so I think we're going to be travel will have a very important role to play. Now, coming to automobiles, I think automobiles, from the European automobiles, we haven't had a very great exposure to European cars, despite the fact that we know a Mercedes, we know an Audi, we know what is a BMW.
A BMW, yes.
But because of the very obscene customs duty which is slapped on them, is that we haven't had a good look at these cars, which obviously are, according to me, are much better than, let's say, a Korean car. So those cars will come to us at a cheaper rate. And with GST now coming in, GST has one advantage as far as luxury cars are concerned, is that there'll be at least something like 4 to 12% price revision downwards, because of the GST peaking at 28%, and then they have the cess. So everything combined, it will be a great thing that we'll get. And of course, not to forget wine. So wine and perfumes, of course. So these are factors, these are things which are a little out of my horizon, in the sense that I'm not able to lay my hands on them because they're too costly for me. Not because they are of the manufacturing cost happens to be high, but because of the
customs,
across the border taxes, which happens.
Indeed, yes. Ambassador,
I mean, these are
this as well, and I want to ask you another question as well. About the education
that,
sector.
Mr. Sarkar has been talking of are basically those which would come into play if there is an India-EU FTA, which still is under negotiation.
Yes.
It's not yet moved. And I think from the Indian side in that FDA, the linkage was to a regime for visas which would enable our software services to be delivered in Europe more easily. Now, if there is a protectionist and anti-immigrant sentiment which makes visas more difficult, I think the FTA negotiations are going to be difficult to move along, because that's the one sector where India has substantial cost competitiveness.
Sure.
And the same thing about travel to the UK, that if the visas for Indians, because the UK deals very differently with Chinese nationals and Indian nationals for purposes of visas, their visa policy has become very stringent, then Indians are not going to go to the UK whether the pound is cheaper or not.
Fair enough.
Because the UK will deny them the opportunity to go.
Indeed, fair enough. Quick comments from both my guests now on the panel because I'm running out of time. Professor, as far as the education sector is concerned, because UK is a much sought after destination for Indian students, how is Brexit going to impact the students and the education sector?
If Brexit leads to reduction in costs for the Indian students, then certainly it will do a world of good to all those who aspire to study in the UK. As at this juncture, I'm afraid the costs for non-EU nationals are very high in the United Kingdom. That has to change.
No, but that is bound to change, isn't it? Because they have some subsidies for, EU nationals at the moment, and they also have some seats reserved for these EU nationals. That might not continue.
Exactly. So that's part of the imponderable in the future. If that changes, well and good for our students. If it doesn't, then unfortunately it will not create new opportunities for us.
Okay, fair enough.
Right now, the fact that Indian students or foreign students, non-EU students were allowed to work earlier for 2 years, that has been done away with. So that has made it rather unattractive to go to the UK, and the number of students going to the UK has actually come down. They prefer to go to Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
Canada, yes.
These will be the choices, and both to the US and UK you will see perhaps a decline in the number of
Fair
students.
enough. Mr. Dash, your closing comments on the program. Please conclude the show for us with your closing remarks.
I would quite agree with Ambassador Shankar saying that, you see, much will depend on what India is able to negotiate separately now with UK and with the rest of the European Union. Now, this process, I'm sure consultations can start immediately, but formal negotiations would take place only in 2019. That's the time when we will be in election mode in March 2019, and it's not a unidirectional relationship. It is or a single point a deal breaker that one could see, although immigration issues are important. Free movement of professionals, for instance, are very important both in the context of India's negotiation with European Union and with UK separately. And as we know, UK has been a stumbling block in not the FTA with European Union not happening for 10 years now, despite the talks going on. And Prime Minister May herself, as Home Secretary, hasn't contributed to this process because of the restrictive visa policies. So, given this kind of thing on both sides, immigration is an important issue, but it is not something that's a deal breaker in that sense, both in negotiation with vis-a-vis the European Union and UK.
All right. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Meera, Shankar, SK Sarkar, Abhijit Das and Priya, Ranjan Dash, thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.